Hello, and welcome to this edition of the Homeland Defense and Security Information Analysis Center, HDIAC podcast. This podcast is a two-part series featuring discussions on critical infrastructure resilience with Dr. Tanya Thornton of George Mason University's Emergency Management and Homeland Security Program, and Amber Garvey, a technical analyst at HDIAC. Dr. Tanya Thornton is the coordinator for George Mason University's Emergency Management and Homeland Security Program, and serves as a co-principal investigator for the Center for Resilient and Sustainable Communities. Prior to joining George Mason University, Dr. Thornton was the director for the Mississippi Public Safety Data Laboratory at Mississippi State University, where she worked with the Mississippi Highway Patrol in developing their CompStat program. As a scholar, Dr. Thornton's research interests include emergency management, critical infrastructure, and public safety. With an extramural portfolio of approximately $6 million, she has published her work via a number of peer-reviewed outlets. Dr. Thornton is an active member of the American Society for Public Administration, ASPA, having served as a student representative and District 2 representative to National Council. Dr. Thornton was also ASPA's conference program co-chair in 2018, was a co-editor and author for its memos to national leaders, and now serves as a Viewpoint Associate Editor for Public Administration Review. She has also served as treasurer on the board for its section on emergency and crisis management. Dr. Thornton has a doctorate of philosophy in public policy and administration from Mississippi State University, where she also earned a Master of Public Policy and Administration and a Bachelor of Arts in Political Science and an emphasis in the geosciences.
Today, Dr. Thornton is going to teach us about critical infrastructure resilience.
Thank you, Amber. I really appreciate you all having me today. I know these are strange times and everyone's living in a virtual world, and that can present a variety of challenges. So I appreciate everyone who tunes into this podcast. I'm Dr. Tanya Thornton. I am an assistant professor and director of grants at the Schar School of Policy and Government at George Mason University. I do have quite a bit of experience in this area, stemming back about 20 years. So my background is in R&D, as I was getting my graduate degrees, both from Mississippi State University, both in public policy and public administration, with a focus on intelligence gathering, public safety, and emergency management. Obviously, critical infrastructure is a key component to those three areas. And so a lot of the projects that I worked on, funded projects, extramural projects, related to critical infrastructure in one way or another. Now, with the HDIAC, obviously, we're looking at it through the lens of homeland defense, and there's a lot of complexity with that. I mean, critical infrastructure itself is complex, and a lot of people only think about the four major systems. Obviously, that is very very important. So water, transportation, communication, and energy. If one of those goes down, the remaining three will go down. And those are central to the functioning of our governance and society. So, I'm really excited to be exploring these topics with you today, particularly around the nexus of those four systems, and how can we, make sure that we secure their resilience and sustainability, not only at the federal level, but also at the local level.
All right, so I'm going to go ahead and start off with our first question for today. So what makes something critical infrastructure, and what U.S. agency has the responsibility for determining what a critical infrastructure actually is?
The Department of Homeland Security is the department responsible for managing all 16 sectors. And these sectors range among the four that I mentioned previously, so energy, water, communications, and transportation. But we have other sectors that are critically important as well. Financial services, think about the history of this country and our economic vitality through different types of disasters. Government facilities, we have emergency services, hospitals, information technology, which we treat separately than communication. 70% of all internet traffic flows through the Commonwealth of Virginia alone. When we talk about water, we also have to include wastewater, healthcare, particularly right now, and then food and agriculture is another sector. So I don't want to get specifically into each individual sector. The question is this enough? Have we categorized them correctly? And should we look to be expanding them, or is there a way to consolidate them? These are questions that everyone's asking. It's a moving target, just like everything else in the world today.
And so, how and when were these sectors decided upon? When did somebody come together and say, hey, these are the 16 sectors that we need to look at? and these are what is important. These are what are important to the United States critical infrastructure.
Okay, so we really didn't have a good handle on critical infrastructure until maybe the late 1970s. I'm not saying that it did not exist and that there was not a little chatter around it, or that people in positions of importance or decision makers were not thinking about this. But truly, we didn't start thinking about critical infrastructure until after a series of environmental disasters in the 70s. Obviously, we were in the middle of the Cold War, and we had a couple of other crises on hand. But it was not until after 9/11 in which we started really taking a hard look at, all right, if we do have one sector go down, what is the impact on this sector? But we didn't have that terminology. Critical infrastructure wasn't really part of our lexicon. And if you actually go to Google Ngram, which is a project between Google and Harvard University's Cultural Laboratory, the Google Books Project, where they digitized all literary texts. I'm not talking about magazines. I'm not talking about, fiction novels. We're talking about literary text, critical infrastructure. You will see that it did not become a part of our everyday lexicon until the 1970s, but it just took off after 9/11, and rightfully so. Look at all the failures in our intelligence community with a lack of information sharing. And that's part of the brilliance of some of our systems too, is just to be able to protect ourselves in that regard. But we had such a significant impact by that attack on our homeland that the creation of DHS, and then there followed the critical infrastructure sectors.
So I know you said that DHS was kind of responsible for everything, but are there certain are certain agencies overseeing certain sectors?
While the Department of Homeland Security serves as the point of contact, if you will, for all 16 sectors, they do not have the technical expertise in all 16 areas. So if there's energy issues, they're going to have to partner or have the Department of Energy and some of its respective offices and agencies kind of oversee those activities. The same is true with transportation issues in the Department of Transportation. Water, or environmental issues, clearly the EPA is going to get involved. And then if we have healthcare, the Department of Health and Human Services. So while some of these departments and respective agencies serve as think of them as a sub point of contact, not all do. But still, the Department of Homeland Security is the central point of where these activities kind of come together.
Okay. And have these sectors changed over time? Have they always been these 16 certain sectors? Do you think they should be changed or recategorized, anything like that?
That's an important question. I think as our society evolves, clearly we're going to need to look inward at what these 16 sectors mean to us today, what they meant to us when they were initially established. No, they have not changed pretty much. Well, they have not changed since they were established. But that doesn't mean we can't expand upon them, and it doesn't mean that we can't recategorize them. Maybe there's less, maybe there's more. The big failure in a lot of emergency operations these days is the lack of a collaboration. And the more you splinter things out, the more you silo them. So I've been hosting in partnership with a national association this week, a virtual symposium on how can we look at collaborative partnerships and bringing crisis and emergency management together. And so the more people that are at the table, the more you silo things out, the more difficulty you bring in terms of really having meaningful collaboration, because it just impacts the communication between one partner and the other. And the more partners you have to manage, and let's face it, if you've got 16 points of contact for 16 sectors, trust me, it's not just 16. Multiply that probably by 5. And that's the true meaning of what the expansive network of who is in the decision-making role really is. And that's at best guess. I mean, it's probably way more than that. But you can't have that many people at the table and truly be informed.
So, what are some of the big questions surrounding critical infrastructure resilience?
Well, clearly, cybersecurity is always going to have an impact on all sectors. While it is its own sector, It can impact transportation, it can impact IT, it can impact communication systems, energy. And so, many of you who have children at home right now are probably having them, work in a virtual world, just like we all are right now. Now, the question becomes, hackers or other assailants, are they impacting our children's education, particularly K through 5, and being able to access their Zoom platforms, and if so, what are our kids being exposed to during that time if they can hijack the screen from the teacher? And so these are big questions right now, especially as we live in this new normal. And let's face it, we're not getting into the politics and we're not getting into the mechanics of COVID-19. But what we can say for certain, and all of my emergency management, critical infrastructure, and other scholars agree, we COVID has been such a punctuating event. We will never go back to normal. This is the new normal moving forward. Okay, but you need to face it. There's always going to be a more heightened virtual component to our everyday lives, and that also includes our kids. So what are our kids being exposed to? So cybersecurity is a big issue, and it's touching our life in a different way than it had a year ago. We weren't thinking about these things. Also, how can we better protect our local governments? We've seen an uptick in cybersecurity threats, among them being held hostage for different ransoms in order to access some of their documents. And so I only think that that's going to continue to increase. Other big questions around critical infrastructure are, what do we see those as priorities at the local level? Because that's where the rubber meets the road. Like, we want our garbage to be picked up. Now, that's not necessarily a critical infrastructure sector, but at the local level, that is a very important issue. Education is a very important issue. Getting our mail delivered is very important. So maintaining our roadways and our water systems and being able to have electricity. So that is what we think about at the individual local level, okay, in the masses. But when you have, say, a defense base located nearby, that language is going to be very different. What they consider critical infrastructure and what that local government and the citizens in which it serves consider, you've got to have someone in the middle, someone that can speak both languages to come bring the heads together at the talking table, right? That can share the similarities, but also notate the differences, because in a lot of respects, they're not that far off. It's just a language issue. Back to the engram that I mentioned earlier, it's the lexicon in which you use in order to describe things. And so if you don't have someone who can walk both sides of that lexicon, then there's going to be a significant gap, and so you're not going to get very far. So that's another big question around critical infrastructure: is how can we partner better with our federal agencies? And this isn't just about Department of Defense. This is about our federal agencies.
This has been part 1 of the Critical Infrastructure Resilience podcast. The conversation with Dr. Tanya Thornton continues where it left off with part 2, which can be found at the HDIAC website at www.hdIAC.org.